be able to use the SPSS that actually Dr. Krugan has actually explained in terms of how, if you have collected the quantitative data, you can now be able to analyze this quantitative data from the quantitative research design actually you have developed in terms of the proposal. So let me share the PowerPoint presentation and be able to proceed from there. I hope it is clear the other side. You can be able to see?
Yes, sir, it is visible, sir.
It's okay, thank you. So we are looking at quantitative research design and application of SPSS. But in this case, the other previous speakers talked about how to use SPSS to analyze data, especially the quantitative data that you may have collected once you have done the write-up in terms of writing the proposal. So we are looking at how to come up with the quantitative research design before you come up with the SPSS. So we'll be looking at basics of quantitative research design and other methods for data collection. So in this case, we'll have to explain the philosophy of quantitative research design, outline the procedures for conducting a quantitative research. Then we also look at how to examine quantitative data collection method. So in terms of our introduction, we are assuming that especially most of us, maybe either you are doing studies or you are carrying out writing proposals or writing papers and so on. So either you're looking at a quantitative aspect you want to look at in terms of collecting data that is quantitative in nature, where you're going to apply the SPSS that has been talked about or has been explained in terms of how to use different types of ways of analysis, statistical analysis, to be able to analyze your data. So before that, there is the initial aspect of preparing your work for quantitative analysis. So that preparation is actually what I'm looking at in terms of my presentation. So in terms of quantitative research design, we have the philosophy in terms of how you need to think about before you come up with a quantitative study. So you have, like in this case, we have the positivist assumption, so that you need to reason in terms of if you are planning in terms of knowledge, you assume that actually there is knowledge in the world, and this knowledge needs to be either scientific way or need to be brought out through verification or through scientific approach that you should be able to analyze and be able to come up with a clear conclusion. So in terms of philosophical aspect, positivist assumption actually governs or govern claims about what warrants knowledge, because we assume that the world is actually full of knowledge. So as researchers or as students who are doing either master's or PhD students, it is very important for you to choose the correct format in terms of carrying out your study or carrying out your research proposal, especially if it is quantitative, for you to be able to analyze the data, because the correct design will be able to help you choose the correct method that you're going to use for data analysis, especially if you're going for quantitative. So positive involves challenging the traditional notion of the absolute truth of knowledge. So we are assuming that actually, yes, there is knowledge, but we want to find out if this knowledge exists and how is it true, that what we claim to be true is actually true. It reflects on deterministic philosophy in which causes probably the determined effects, and also we look at the outcomes. What is causing effect and what are the outcomes and so on. So we look at the cause-effect kind of relationship in terms of quantitative research design. It is also a reductionistic inquiry of reducing ideas into small or discrete set of ideas to test such a variable that constitutes hypothesis or what you call research questions. So in most cases for quantitative research, you'll either come up with what you call a research question or research questions, or sometimes you'll have to develop what you call the research hypotheses that are very, very significant for you to be able to analyze or use them for analysis. So we assume that the world, especially those who are in terms of those students who are looking in terms of science oriented subjects, we assume the world is governed by laws. We also have theories. So these theories are either tested or verified through a positive or post-positive approach in terms of trying to find out. You develop hypothesis. From this hypothesis, you cannot be able to come up with either questions, or from those hypotheses, you can test and verify if those hypotheses are true. You can be able to fail to reject or be able to accept the hypothesis that you have developed early on. So the reasoning, the initial reasoning is very, very important if you are developing a study that you're going to analyze the data, collect the data, and then analyze using either the SPSS software, especially if it's a quantitative kind of data. So quantitative research focuses on gathering of numerical data and generalizing it across groups of people to explain a particular phenomena. So it means that you'll have to come up with mostly the data is numerical in nature. There will be figures, there will be numerical values that you will be collecting. And these numerical values, once you have come up with your research topic, you have your research problem, and also you have what you call the hypothesis or the research questions, then you must be able to identify methods of data collection that you're going to use. Then from there, you cannot be able to collect your numerical data for analysis. And you are saying that if you're going for quantitative kind of research design, it means you're going to generalize this. You have to come up with a sample. Then this sample is used to be generalized to the entire population. So quantitative research is formal, objective, systematic process in which numerical data are used to obtain information about the world. This is a systematic empirical investigation of observable phenomena via statistical, mathematical, or computational technique. So it establishes statistically significant conclusion about a population by starting a representative sample of the entire population. Because you realize that if you're going for quantitative research side, it means that you'll have to come up with a sample from that population. Then from this sample is what you use to in terms of your research study. So then using the methods for data analysis, you'll have now to generalize your findings to the entire population and so on. That is if you are, for example, going for quantitative study. So quantitative research is an approach of testing objective theories by examining the relationship among the variables. So in your study, you'll have to identify which variables are you studying in your respective research question. Each research question or each hypothesis must have the variables under consideration. And those variables will be very important for you in terms of studying, so in terms of collecting data that can be used to test the objectives or test the theories and be able to respond under them later on. So qualitative research methods, actually, it measures attitudes or behaviors, opinion, or other variables to support or reject a premise. So it means that, for example, if you're looking like a population, you can be able to come up with a sample from that population, identify that sample and try to look at the attitudes or the behaviors or the opinions or other variables. Like if it's an experimental kind of study, it means you have to go to the lab, then identify which variables are you looking for in that experiment you'll be doing. Look at the control groups or the control group that you'll be looking in terms of experimental approach, and which ones will not be control group, so that you can now be able to justify through the hypothesis that you have developed and later on. Then we have what you call, like in this case, what is a research design? Because if you're coming up with a study or a proposal, it is very important that you must have a research design. A research design is very, very fundamental in study. And if you get the correct research design, then you are sure of your study, you may come to conclusion very fast. But if you lose the concept of research design, it becomes very difficult for you to come to the conclusion. Even if you're doing a degree or you're doing master's or PhD, you may find you're taking a lot of time because the starting point or the development of your research design was not accurate. So what is research design? The main reason for research design is to relate efficiency and effectiveness of the study to save on time, energy, and cost. Because you must come up with a work plan. You must develop something that is that is going to drive you or give you direction. Where are you coming from and where are you heading to? So that you have a clear framework or roadmap that I'm from this point A, I'm heading to point B. So this research design is the master plan specifying the methods and procedures for collecting and analyzing the needed information in a research study. Research design is a blueprint of conducting the study that maximizes control over factors that could interfere with the validity of findings. So when you have a research design, it means you are coming up with a clear procedure on how you want your study to flow from the beginning up to the end. It gives you a direction or a framework that actually you will be able to follow to minimize the issues or factors that may either interfere in terms of your research findings, in terms of your validity and so on. So quantitative research designs are either descriptive, you may go for descriptive approach, or you may go for what you call the experimental approach. Descriptive means that the subjects or the variables will be measured once only. And if it is experimental, then the subjects may be measured before and after a given treatment has been given to the group that you had either selected or identified to be given that condition. So it means you can either go for descriptive kind of a study or an experimental kind of study that is also very, very important. So quantitative research design, either you have to select either. You may have both of them, or you may have either descriptive or what you call experimental. So descriptive or experimental research design dictates how you gather, analyze, and interpret your results. Because if you say, for example, you're writing your research design, and initial point you say that your study will be a descriptive research design, means the way you are going to collect your data will be determined by which research design have you selected at the beginning. And that's very, very important. If you talk about is experimental, that means there is different methods of data analysis that you may have to use in terms of the data analysis so that you come up with the correct findings for your study. So the correct research design is very, very important to determine the data analysis methods that you're going to use in terms of coming up with conclusions or research findings. So quantitative research is aimed at discovering how many people think or act or feel in the same way. For example, if you're using population of human beings and so on, then you're looking at their thoughts or their actions or their feelings in a particular way, but now so that you come up with a conclusive figure in a statistic, which can be able to be used to draw inferences or conclusion about the entire population. So the research design refers to your plan for answering your fundamental research question. So once you generate your research questions or your research objectives in terms of either hypothesis and so on, then your research plans actually, or research design actually comes up to respond to the giveaway on how you are going to answer those research questions or respond to the hypothesis that you have developed in your research plan. Sorry. So you have the characteristics of research design. What are some of these characteristics? One, data is gathered using structured research instruments. So characteristics of quantitative research design. The data you're going to gather is actually gathered using a structured research instrument. It means that if you're going for a questionnaire, for example, you're going for an interview, then it must be structured. You must make sure that it is structured in a way that you must be able to collect data that you can analyze that is actually closed, so that in a way that analysis becomes easy for quantitative data. Results are based on larger sample size that are representative of the entire population. So it means that if your plan is to go for a quantitative kind of study, then it means that actually you must look at a sample that is actually representative of the entire population that you're actually targeting. First, you must estimate the population, then try to see which sample you can use to make it a representative of that entire population that you're looking at. Because at the end of the day, once you have a sample, you will have to generalize this sample to the entire population that actually you have been studying on. Then the research study research study can usually be replicated or repeated, given it is high level of reliability. You can be able to repeat it or you can replicate it in a different way because there is the high aspect of reliability that is actually allowed in the research study, because what you do becomes very, very important in terms of your research. Then the study must be clearly defined research questions or stock hypotheses to which objectives others are sought. So you must come up with clear research questions or clear hypotheses, and then be able to come up with the objectives that are also clear, and you can be able to respond to those objectives in a way that your audience can be able to understand. All aspects of the study are carefully designed before data is actually collected. So make sure that the aspect of the study are carefully designed before data is actually collected. Make sure that you put your things that you're going to use in terms of data collection. Which methods are you going to use for collecting data? If it's questionnaire, if you want to make sure that all those things are in accurate or in order before you collect your data for quantitative data. Then data are in form of numbers. The data you're going to collect is in form of figure, the way I've said earlier on, or statistics, and often arranged in terms of tables, charts, figures, or other non-textual forms. So if you're doing a quantitative research design, then it means your research findings will be in form of tables. You can have charts, you can have figures, you can also have non-textual forms. So those are the things that accompany your data analysis when you're analyzing data that is quantitative as opposed to qualitative. Because if it's quantitative, it means people will want to see the frequency tables, people will want to see the charts, which kind of a chart are you using. And the previous speaker has talked about all these tables and charts are found in SPSS. Once you go to SPSS, you can generate a table, you can generate a chart, you can come up with figures that can be able to support your research findings. Project can be used to generalize the concept widely and predict for future results, and then investigate the causal relationship between the variables under investigation. The researcher uses tools such as questionnaires or computer softwares to collect what you call the numerical data. So key points to consider when reporting results for quantitative research is that one, you have to explain the data collected and their statistical treatment, as well as relevant results in relation to the research problem you are investigating. So make sure that you have to explain the data collected and their statistical treatment if it was experimental, as well as relevant results in relation to research problem you are investigating. So when you are reporting your results, the focal point should be on your research problem and also the research objectives or the hypothesis that we generated earlier on. So that when you are analyzing your data, that data should be responding on the research question that you had earlier posted, that you are looking for this answers for that question. Then report unanticipated events that occur during your data collection. Like is you can look at how the actual analysis differs from the planned analysis. You may find by the end, for example, you have collected your data and realize that either the actual analysis of data and the way you had planned is not the same. So those things you must highlight or bring them out in terms of your reporting. Or missing data, if, for example, you find out that there is data that is missing in terms of analysis that you may not have collected because of either the response rate is below, and how do you cater for that missing data? Will it affect your reliability or validity of your data? So you need to point or talk about it. Then why any missing data does not undermine the validity of your analysis. So those are things that you need to bring in terms of once you are analyzing your data, because in research design, you have to come up with the population, the sample size, find out what is the sample size you're looking for, what is the total detected population. So if you find at the end when you're analyzing that we have some data that is missing, then those things must be pointed out if you are using a quantitative research design. Explain the techniques you use to clean your data set. Tell us which methods or what are some of the ways you use to clean, ensure that your data set is actually clean and ready for analysis. So that you come up with, if you are issued questionnaires, find out which way did you clean, ensure that all the items were responded to in terms of your data set. Then choose minimally a sufficient statistical procedure, provide a rationale for its use and a reference for it. Specify, for example, if you're using any computer software, specify the computer software that you're using. And if you're using, for example, like the previous speaker has talked about SPSS, if you're going to analyze your data using SPSS, then you must tell us or tell the audience which program of computer were you using and which kind of version, because the SPSS, they're in different versions, and which version did you use in terms of your data analysis. And look at the statistical procedures, which methods were used in terms of analysis, or which kind of test were you carrying out on the data. If you're using a t-test, the way the previous speaker said, you must be able to state and explain clearly that the data was being analyzed using t-test. If it is f-test, the same, so that you are clear about the tests that you carried out on your data in terms of research findings. If it is descriptive, just highlight. Descriptive, give us the totals or give us the figures, give us the frequencies, and so on in terms of percentages, so that people can be able to understand how you collected the data. Then when using differential statistics, provide descriptive statistics, confidence intervals, sample sizes, or for each variable, as well as the value for test statistic. It is direction, the degrees of freedom, and the significance level. Report about the actual value of P, which is also very, very important. So this one has actually been highlighted by the previous speaker when he was showing you examples from SPSS, how you can write your results either following a given format, like APA format. Once you have gotten your output from the SPSS window, you must be able to highlight some of these variables applicable, or some of the factors that are applicable, the confidence interval, the sample size, and then you look at the test statistics, the direction, the degrees of freedom, and so on. The significant level is also very important when you're reporting your work in terms of the research findings. Then another thing is to avoid inferring casually, or particularly in non-randomized or randomized designs, or without further experimentation. So in this case means that if you are carrying out a study that is not randomized, then there is no need to infer in terms of the cases that you actually, or the causes that led to that in terms of what happened, especially if you may not have carried out an experiment or further experiment to establish the causes or the effect, what is causing that, then there is no need to do that in terms of report findings. Don't assume that this is what causes that if you have not done that experiment, or you have not carried out experiment in your study that that actually looked for the causes, then that actually the effect is this. Then use tables to provide exact values, or you can use even the software. In this case, there's no need to use the tables. You can use the software, or even use the software will be able to give you the correct figures. Use figures to convey global effects. Keep the figures small in size. Include graphic representation of confidence intervals whenever possible. So this means that when you are reporting your research findings, it is good that you maintain both the figures, use also the tables where possible to support your presentation, so that actually people can be able to see this is what you anticipated to do in your research plan, and these are the research findings, and this can be supported in this way, and so on. So information that can be put in a graphic way, let it be put in that, but don't force the two. If you have information that is in graphic, and the wording should only be used to support the graphic representation of the information in the research output. Then always tell the reader what to look for in the tables and figures when you're doing your reporting. So find out that the reader can be able to go to the table and be able to see the information or the key points that you want to bring out from your research findings. And those key points must be very, very important in terms why you want the reader or the audience to be able to see those key points in terms of from the research findings. Now, that issues in terms of sections of a quantitative research design. If you're carrying out a quantitative research study, the issues or the sections that are very, very critical that you must put into consideration. And these sections, one, you have what you call introduction, which is usually written in the present tense and from the third person point of view. When you have the introduction, you must be able to specify how are you writing it. It must be in the present tense and from the third person point of view. Then they must be clear and concise on focusing on the research problem. Then a review of literature with clear existing knowledge gap, so must bring it from the introduction. Then a precise theoretical framework, which is also very, very important when you're looking at the introduction. So you must have a clear way, a clear roadmap that this is what you're doing and this is where you're heading to. So you must have a clear and concise research problem. Is that is actually within the introduction. Then a literature review with clear existing knowledge gap, then a precise theoretical framework. Some students also use conceptual framework. It's also allowed, so long as you know what you're doing in terms of how you want to develop your research literature review. It's also very, very important. You can either use a theoretical framework or use what you call a conceptual framework. Then when you come to methodology, it should be able to describe each objective of the study and how you will achieve all those objectives. So the methodology is very important. It should be able to describe the method that you're going to use to achieve your objectives or your hypothesis that you had stated early on in your study. So those are very key in terms of methodology. Methodology should be able to give you a roadmap of how you respond to the research questions or the hypothesis that you had stated early on. Then the methods section should have the following. One, it should have the study population and the sampling procedures, which it must highlight what is your population. It means the total population you're looking at. That is very, very important. Sampling procedures, you must look at which method are you using to sample from that population. Which method are you using? Are you going for probability sampling or are you going for non-probability sampling procedures? And you must explain and tell us how are you going to go about the sampling so that somebody can be able to understand in terms of the sampling procedures you have used to get your sample from the entire population. Then the data collection methods are also very important. In the methodology section, you must outline out which methods are you going to use to collect your data. When you're collecting your data, you must identify which methods are you using. Are you using a questionnaire? Are you using an interview schedule? Do you use a focus group and so on? Because there are some methods will not be used. Like in this case, if it's a quantitative research site, you may not go for focused groups, or you may not go for unstructured interviews. You go for structured interviews, or you go for questionnaires, and these questionnaires must be structured kind of questionnaires that you're using for data collection. Then you must also, in the methodology section, you must highlight the data analysis method that you're going to use in terms of coming up with which method are you using for analyzing data. So it means that if you're going to use, for example, SPSS, the software, that is at the level you need to mention about the SPSS software for analysis of data. So in terms of SPSS, you must be able to come up with the kind of, is it descriptive or going for inferential SPSS, and which kind of test would you use in terms of coming up with explicit way of analysis of your data so that somebody who's going through your work can be able to understand that these are the methods you're going to use, or these are the way how you're going to analyze your data. And different methods are applied to different research designs. That's very, very critical to note. Different data analysis methods are applied to different research designs. So once you have stated in your research design, then it must be flowing to the data analysis method so that you know from the initial point of view that this is a method I'm using for data analysis. Then even data collection methods. Not all data collection methods will be used for quantitative research design. You'll find out that quantitative research may have a particular method for collecting data. You may not use all the methods. So you must be particular, which method am I going to use for quantitative? Like I've seen, for example, in quantitative research, what you can do is either you use questionnaires, and these questionnaires must be structured kind of questionnaires, which can be done, you can either administer them online, or you can be able to send the paper questionnaires and so on. But if you're going for qualitative kind of study, then you can go even for focused groups and so on, and use even interviews that are unstructured for qualitative research. So that is, you need to be clear on which methods are using for data analysis or which methods are using for collection for data. Then we have to come to the section for results. When, for example, you have collected your data and you have the research findings, how do you narrate or explain or come up and say, these are my findings? So the research findings should be written in a clear and objective language. We must come up with a clear way and a precise language that everybody can be able to understand, whether you're using some mathematical formulas or statistical formulas that are complicated. In terms, when it comes to research findings, you minimize those formulas so that you use language that people can be able to understand, and it's easy to understand the findings of your study. Then data is presented using graphs, tables, charts, and other non-textual elements to help the reader understand the data. So you bring in the tables, you can bring in the charts. Charts are very many, and all these charts are in SPSS. So if you are working, you have a software for SPSS, you only need to select which kind of a chart you want. If you want a pie chart, looking at the information you have, you can either present that information in terms of a pie chart, or you can present that information in terms of a bar chart or column chart. So you can decide how well that information can be presented in a given research findings. So it is up to you as a researcher or as a student to find out that which kind of presentation is the best, which kind of graph do I need for this information. So if you are going to use charts, and these charts are several, you must understand each chart presents its own different information best. And you must look at the collected information and see, if I've collected this information, is it wise being presented using a pie chart or a bar graph or a column graph or even a line? You can just present it in a straight line or even a, what you call a histogram or something like that. So long as somebody can be able to understand the information and the graph you have chosen should be the correct for that presentation for the information that you're going to select for presentation, the data that you're actually using presenting. Then give the statistical analysis logical and sequential order. It means that your work should be flowing. Depending on the research hypothesis that you had early on formulated or you had come up with the research hypothesis, each hypothesis must have a correct response from the research findings, that you are going to respond to each of the research questions or hypotheses correct in terms of analysis. So somebody when is going through your work in terms of reporting can be able to understand and find out that actually you are correctly responding to each of your research questions or hypotheses. And it should be logical. Logical means it should be scientifically, it should be flowing scientifically, this order should be flowing. Then ensure that each objective is responded to by either descriptive or inferential statistics. And the way you have stated your objective will determine if you're going to use your inferential statistics or you're going to use your descriptive. That's why your research design is very key. How you plan to structure your research design is very key in terms of establishing out which method will be used for analysis, then for reporting of your results. So you must be very clear in terms of how the objectives are going to be responded to. Are you going to use descriptives? Descriptives are things to do with the mean, frequencies, and so on, mode, median, and so on. Or are you going to use the inferential statistics, where you're going to carry out tests on the data to establish out the significance levels? So those are things that you must be able to bring out in your research plan. Then the last part, of course, is normally the discussion and or what we call the conclusion. So the discussion should be analytic, logical, and comprehensive. It means it's a summary of what actually your research findings are. So your discussion or the conclusion must give a summary, a brief summary of your results and your research questions, then the findings that are actually respond to that. So you must be able to come up with a summary of the research findings. Then we have either part of the recommendations and future areas of research. Because once you have concluded your study, you might find other areas emerging, new ones that you didn't anticipate in your study. And those areas that are emerging form basis of a new research that can be carried out to establish either what are the causes of what you have observed in the previous study that you have actually carried out. So there are types of quantitative research design or research. If you are doing quantitative research, there are different types that you can be able to use if you want to do a study, and this study is a quantitative in nature. You want to collect numerical data. It means you must identify which type of quantitative research are you going to go for. You can either go for descriptive research design, or go for correlational research design, or go for something called for quasi-experimental research design, or go for experimental research design. So if you are doing, there are different types. If you're going for experimental, we have true experimental, we have quasi-experimental, or pre-experimental. If you're doing an experimental research design, then you can go for descriptive, you can go for developmental surveys, you can go for cause comparative, that is cause effect kind of a study, or you can go for a predictive kind of it, or you can go establish out relationship between variables and so on. For qualitative, we may not be looking at it here because this one is purely for quantitative, but for qualitative research design, you can look for historical, phenomenological, ethnography, case studies, or you can develop what you call, can go for grounded theory that can be under qualitative kind of research design. But for quantitative, basically we have the four. And under the four, we have the subgroups that you must be able to understand how to incorporate them in your study. Because if you are writing your research plan, then you must tell the reader, I'm using descriptive research design, I'm using either correlation research design, or I'm using quasi-experimental research design, or I'm going for experimental research design. So that that person is well prepared and knows the data analysis he expects. Once you have said you're going for experimental, then you expect to see different inferential statistics down here. in terms of your analysis. If you're going for descriptive, then basically this person they expect to see the frequencies, the percentages, and so on, the graphs, the charts, and so on. Just describing variables in terms of your research design. If you're going for correlational, then you will only see how you're looking at how variables are relating to each other and so on. Now, in descriptive, the way I've said, it seeks to observe and measure the variables under investigation. So you observe the variables and you measure them under given investigation. So this research design is used when trying to identify characteristics or categories or trends. So you are just trying to find out what are some of the characteristics, what is coming out, what are the categories, what is trend, what is happening in the population and so on. So you're just to identify variables, what is happening in the variables that you have identified. What is the trend? What is happening? What are the behaviors? How are they behaving? That is descriptive. So it cannot establish causal relationships between the variables. So it means if you're going for a descriptive research design, you cannot say that now you want to establish how is one variable related to the next variable, unless you change in your research methodology and research design that my study is about correlation, or you're looking at regression, then you can now look at the cause relationship. But a descriptive research design cannot establish what is making the other variable behave like the way it is behaving. So that is very, very important to understand when you have this kind of research designs. Now, correlational research design, in this case now, is a non-experimental research method used to identify a relationship between two variables with no influence from the extraneous variable. So it means that you have either two or more variables and you're looking at how are these variables affecting each other. Then holding the extraneous variable constant. You are assuming that the extraneous variable will not have any effect on the two or more variables you are looking at their correlation or in terms of their relationship. So that is a correlation kind of study. So it's non-experimental. You're not going to carry out a study, but you're only looking at the variables in a given study, and you are looking at how one variable affects the other variable. So the correlation between two variables will reflect the direction or the strength of their relationship. So in terms of analysis, correlation, you'll have to look at these variables in terms, find out how does one affect the other one. Look at in terms of direction, where this variable is going to direct the other variable, or the strength. How strong is that kind of correlation in terms of how they are closely they're related in terms of their relationship. So correlation may range. You can have a correlation from -1 to 1. So we also have a correlation of 0. For example, it's a correlation 0. It means that the variables are not related. If you find that correlation between two variables is 0, then it means that when you that study, it means the two variables don't have any relationship. A positive relation indicates that there's a positive relationship, so such that if you have an increase in one variable, leads to an increase in another variable, and so on. That is a positive correlation. And the other one is obvious, where you have a negative correlation. It means that if there is a negative, an increase in one variable leads to a decrease in the other variable. That is what you call the negative, or what you call negative correlation. And those things are in SPSS. If you analyze, you don't need to cram this, because once you have identified in your research design that my study is a correlational research design, then once you go to SPSS and run the data, it's very easy for you to come up with the correlation coefficients that are going to be used in terms of your analysis or in terms of reporting your research findings. And you can come up with the scatter plots that are very, very important in terms of be able to see how strong is the relationship between your variables and so on. So it's very, very important that you need to look at your research design first, because once you establish your research design and you put a clear framework, which kind of research design you're going for, then it becomes very easy for you to be able to know in terms of analysis using the SPSS software that you are using correlation, then you can go from analyze, go to correlation, run the correlation, and you can even use the scatter plot to be able to see if the points are actually positively correlated or negative correlated, or there is no correlation at all. You can be able to find out that. Then you can even test the correlation using the t-test or the specific method for testing the significant level and find out the strength of the relationship in terms of correlation. But the information should be in your work plan, in terms of your research plan early on, because you cannot you are using correlation in your data analysis, and the method that was in the research methodology is a different method, or you talked about descriptive. So if your method was correlation, then it means in data analysis, what the reader expects to see should be in terms of correlation, or what the audience would expect to see should be in terms of correlation analysis. Then we have the quasi-experimental research. Quasi-experimental research aims to identify a cause and effect, the relationship between two variables. It means if you have an independent variable or a dependent variable, then you can be able to carry out what you call a quasi-experimental research design. So quasi means it's not experiment, you don't do it, or you don't randomize the variables or the samples that are actually the variables in terms of what you're going to do. You only need to have them conditions in a given way. Then you give a treatment to a given group and so on. The other one is not given the treatment and so on, but randomization is not done for quasi-experimental research design. So it involves subjects being assigned to groups based on non-random criteria. So it means you don't do randomization when you're doing quasi-experimental. Then the subjects, you assign them in different groups. You can have group 1 or group 2. The way the previous speaker was explaining in terms of 2 groups, and he was carrying out tests using the SPSS to find out if there is statistical differences between the means of these two groups. So if the means are statistically significant, then you can come up with that kind of conclusion. So if you have like two groups of people, and you can calculate their means and be able to carry out a test on them to establish the statistical significance of that those 2 groups, or the 3 groups, or even you have 5 or more groups, then you may be doing what you call a quasi-experimental research design, and ensure that it's non-randomized in terms of you don't do randomization. This research design is often employed when true experiments cannot be carried out due to practical or ethical reasons. You cannot perform the actual experiment on the variables or on the samples that you have selected. Because if you can perform the practical, or you can carry out the experiment, then you need to go for experimental research design. The advantage of this design is that it has a higher external validity, and that most of the true experiment, as it often involves real world intervention as opposed to artificial laboratory settings. So those are some of the issues. So those are some of the issues when you want to carry out your research design. For example, if you involve, it is a quasi-experimental research design, it means there are factors in your study that have guided you to choose this kind of research design. And those factors are very, very important to guide you, to help in terms of selecting which design you want to use for your data, or for your collection of your data. Then the last one, as you have heard, is the experimental research design. This one aims to measure the effect of one or more independent variables on one or more dependent variables with the use of scientific methods. So it means here you must carry out the practical. It must be scientific. You must, there's issues of accuracy. There is randomization. You must ensure that the samples are randomized. So it's very, very significant, especially those who are working in the science field. Then you must be able to use this kind of research design for you to establish something if you are working in a science field kind of area of specialization. So the basic intent of experiment is to test the impact of treatment or intervention on the outcome, controlling for all other factors that may influence the outcome. So you try as much as possible to control any other variable that may affect the effect on, either have an effect on the dependent and the independent variables. So you want to find out the effect when one is actually one variable is controlled, what happens to the other variable, or if there is an intervention, there is treatment on one variable or one group, what happens to the group that did not have treatment, and so on. That is sort of scientific way of coming up with research findings. So this is done by manipulating the independent variable to study the effect, its effect on the dependent variable. So you manipulate one variable, which is the independent variable, and find out what will have what will be the effect on the dependent variable. This experiment research involves conducting a set of procedures to test the hypothesis of the study. So in this case, most cases you find out that you generate hypothesis at the beginning of your work plan in terms of your research study. Then you want to test, find out if you will fail to agree to those hypotheses or you will not agree with them. So they end up forming theories or end up forming rules that will actually be in your research findings after you have done the experiment and so on. So if you're carrying out this, means you must establish the two facts, you must identify the variables under consideration and see how to randomize those variables or different groups that will be involved in the experimental research study. Now, what are the data collection methods that can be used in terms of quantitative? If you have collected this data using the methods we have mentioned, that actually the ones that I've discussed early on. So we have said early on that there are different methods that are used to collect different data, depending on which method or which kind of research design you establish. So if it's a quantitative research design, it means you are collecting quantitative data. And we have quantitative data collection methods that are very, very significant in terms of data collection. So data collection is the process of gathering or measuring information on variables of interest in an established systematic fashion that enables one to answer queries or stated research questions, test hypotheses, or evaluate the outcome. So data is collected is either in form of, can be in primary or secondary sources. You can either get it from primary, it means the raw data, or you can get it from established books, that is the secondary data. So it is collected using the surveys. You can come up with surveys, you can come up with interviews, observation, document reviews, or secondary data collection methods that are very, very significant in terms of data collection. So for quantitative, you use closed-ended surveys or online quizzes. And closed-ended surveys are based on categorical variables, or you can have what you call interview or ratio variables. So categorical surveys questions are classified. You can either have the dichotomous where you have a question, yes or no, or multiple choice questions, or checkboxes that can be used to respond to that. Interval or ratio questions consist of red scale. You can have Likert scale or matrix questions that involves a set of predefined values to chosen from a fixed kind of scale and so on. So closed-ended questions can have basically that question that provide respondents with a predefined list of options to choose from. So it means you can have a closed-ended. For example, you're doing quantitative, then the best one is to have a closed-ended questions, like the ones they have given here. Why do you eat ice cream at fictionalized ice cream parlor? So you can either, among the multiple choices you have been given, you only like a respondent may select one, or you can also allow the respondent to select as many multiple choices as they wish, depending on the kind of questions you have asked them in your study. So categorical questions, they are nominal for survey questions. Examples may include the ones I've talked about, the dichotomous, which are, yes, they're very simple questions and very easy to analyze, especially if you're using the SPSS and so on. The softwares, it becomes very easy for you to analyze these kind of questions. Then we have the multiple choice questions. They offer 3 or more predetermined number options, while they can allow for single or multiple answers. So it means you have varieties of answers to choose from, like the one this side, the one that is being shown on the screen. Who is your favorite superhero? So you can have A, B, C, D, and the respondents can be able to select among those ones. So your research design will determine which kind of questions you need to ask the respondents. And you cannot just come up with one kind of question, yes or no, yes or no, throughout. No, you must vary your questions so that these questions are able to help you gather more information in terms of the respondents. Then checkbox questions. Checkboxes are multiple choice type questions, and they add flexibility of being able to choose more than one option. And you can do them online because checkboxes nowadays we have so many softwares that can be used to generate categorical questions that are very, very significant in terms of respondents. So checkbox means you can be able to develop, and the respondents can be able to select more than either one multiple choice if they wish to select. So we have the rating scale questions. These ones are very, very important. The respondents are asked to assess an issue on basis of an already predetermined dimension. So the question usually displays a range of answers option that can be on any scale, either from 1 to 10 or 0 to 100 and so on. Most of us, I know we have seen this. We have responded to surveys online. We have responded to questionnaires. We have responded to interviews and so on. And we have seen this kind of scales. But as a student or a researcher, you need to know how to come up with credible and reliable questionnaires. That's why it's very good to learn about this. And you cannot just generate a question once. You must have in your questionnaire, you must have several types of questions with different characteristics or different assessing different variables or different skills in terms of a questionnaire. So if you have this one, this is where I find you are given a scale and the respondents are able to rate either not or at all likely. How would you recommend, how likely are you to recommend this product? This may be like a marketing student who is trying to find out the market about the product they're selling and trying to establish out. So this such a kind of question rating scales must be in your questionnaire when you are studying, coming out of such a study. The Likert scale is very common. Most of us use it. If you are a student, you need to know how to develop the Likert scale questions. How interested are you in getting free Likert scale surveys? So that's an example. But Likert scale is one of the most popular and reliable way of measuring perception, attitudes, and opinions. It was developed by American social psychologist, that is Renessis Likert. So it's a psychologist who came up with an interval of an Likert scale. It can be a 5-point Likert scale, 7-point Likert scale that can be used to actually be able to determine the variables and be able to measure the attributes that you're looking for in a given sample, in a given population. And these are closed-ended questions, meaning that you may come up with the frequencies and so on. You can come up with the statistical mean, or you can come up with the statistical tests that you want to do on that data once you collect using the structured questionnaires. It enables questionnaire takers to express their attitude by choosing one of the given answer option. So you either can select one or there's some questions, but in this case, for Likert scales, we only allow the respondent to select one multiple choice only. That's why it's very, very important. It's not like check boxes. Matrix questions. Matrix surveys questions are perfect if you are looking to ask several questions in a row that contains the same answer options. And these ones you have seen, most of us have responded to this. So this forms what you call a matrix. A matrix question is a series of rating scale or a Likert questions. So depending on your study, your research topic, your research problem, it is you as a person or a researcher to find out, how do I want to frame my questions? Do I want to use Likert questions? Do I want to use matrix questions? But my advice to you is that you must use almost all these kind of questions that I'm trying to explain to you. They are very, very significant in terms of generating quantitative data that you are going to use for analysis. Like, please rate our software on each of the following: ease of learning, ease of use, power of completeness, quality of technical support, quality of documentation. So you must read more about how to come up with very good multiple choices for matrix questions that can help you in terms of build a good scale that you can use for establishing or measuring the variables under consideration. Number 7 of the open-ended questions. Open-ended surveys question enable respondents to supply their own answers in the box provided on the text box. So they write their own answers. There are no predefined answers, and the respondents have the freedom to express their opinion in the wording of their choice. It also gives them a chance to respond in more detail. But the disadvantage of open-ended questions in quantitative data is that it will take you a long time for you to be able to analyze that data, because you find if you have like 1 million respondents, analyzing the views, it will not be very easy. Each item having its own views, it will be not very easy. That's why we go for closed-ended. So even if you want to put a question that's open-ended or an item that's open-ended in a questionnaire, make sure there are not very many items, just a few items that you can easily analyze or get the feelings of the respondents. But if you put each question is open-ended, it will not be very easy. You can even not use SPSS to be able to analyze. It will take you a long period of time for you to collect the data and analyze the data and even clean the data. It's not very easy. So you must be able to know in your research design, which kind of questions are you looking for? And those questions, are they practical? Can they be responded to? So when you're designing the research questions, make sure that try even yourself to answer those questions and find out what are the responses. Are they coming out clearly so that you understand and check the reliability and validity of the research instrument. So in this case, we have open question. Why don't you eat ice creams at the fictionalized ice cream parlor? Then the person explains there and gives a sentence. So that's an example of that. But if you close this one, you'll find where it's closed. You give the multiple choices, and the respondent will be able to select among the multiple choices that actually you have given. So in open-ended, you leave it for the respondent to write a story or a sentence or an answer in this box provided. Demographic questions. I'm almost through. This is the last slide. Demographic questions. These are particularly useful if you are looking to gather the background information about the user. That is the person, the respondent. You want to find out what is your age, what is your gender, what is your salary income, those are the factors. If you're designing a questionnaire, demographic factors are very, very important. They enable you to learn about the target audience. You get this information to learn more about your target audience, how they are. They include age, gender, education level, employment status, annual household income, marital family status, housing, business, farm ownership, and so on. So those are information that when you are designing a questionnaire, you must have that information to be able to find out which kind of audience or which kind of sample are you dealing with, or what are some of the characteristics of these people you are dealing with, so that you know their age bracket. That age bracket may be able to inform you in terms of their study, how to handle the situation. What are their employment status? What are their gender and so on? Those are things that are very, very important when you are designing a questionnaire. And it's very, very important that you put those factors into consideration. But when you're designing a demographic factors, demographic questions, make sure ethical consideration is considered. Don't harm or don't put a question that the respondents will feel shy to respond to, or they feel they're being harassed to respond to, or they don't like to respond to that question. So make sure that you understand your target population very well and understand your sample very well. So that the questions you put, there's some questionnaires you may develop without demographic factors. There are some questions you must develop with the demographic factors. There are some you limit about the demographic factor, depending on the population and the sample size you are targeting. It's very, very important so that you don't look like if you are harassing the people in terms of their factor, their personal life and so on. So you must be very, very conversant with the population that you're looking at. So that is very, very keen. If you're talking about what is your age, and put it in a bracket, don't list all the age that you have from 0 up to 100 or 150, no. Just put a class. Like, what is your age? Some people may be under 18, others may be 18 and 24 years old, 25 and 34 years old, 35 and 44 years old, 45 like that, and over 55. So that there's no distinct figure that these ones are 55, no. You group them in what you call classes. That's how they can be able to respond to some of the demographic factors and so on. I think with that one, I come to an end for this. I've basically looked at research design and how to develop a questionnaire and which type of questions to put in a questionnaire. But the rest have been covered by the previous speaker on how to analyze data now that you have collected using the SPSS. So I've not handled the SPSS in this presentation, but I've helped you to understand the research designs and how to develop a questionnaire that can be realistic in terms of collecting quantitative data. Thank you very much for listening to me.